So as hoopers, we're always looking for that extra edge. How do we get downhill faster? How do we get past our defender with a quicker first step? And most times, the best athletes just naturally do this stuff. They don't even have to think about it because it's just built into the way that they move. But with that being said, we can take the qualities and the techniques that the best athletes have, try to reverse engineer them, and play around with them in our own movement or our own training to see if they work. Now, one of these patterns that you see a lot of high-level players do is hinging forward as they're looking to get into their attack. This isn't the typical chest up, wide stance way that we're typically taught to get low, but you see a lot of players do this and it works. So let's dive in and check out why. So first we'll look at this from the perspective of what that hip hinge does as we're leaning forward. So as I'm getting into that hip hinge here, it's actually gonna stretch, and you can feel this if you do it. Stretch this posterior musculature, so I'm loading my glutes, hamstrings, and you can even start to see some tone in my calf as my Achilles starts to get some tension. When we take that first step or we explode past our defender, we're gonna load that hip up and then extend anyways. So we might as well be in a position where we're primed to go whenever we're ready to. As I'm hinging forward to really move through that full range of motion, get out with that first step. Also, an important consideration is that it puts my center of mass ahead of my feet. So if I'm in this low upright position, my center of mass is directly in between my feet. Now I have to lean, drop my feet back, and then go. If I'm already in this kind of hinge position, I'm slightly ahead of my feet, and now I can just fall from there, extend those hips, and get going downhill. Now note that it's not necessarily about shin angle here, although it does help us get into these lower shin angles. So if I'm hinged at the hip here, I'm ready to go. Notice that my shins are still vertical, but now that my center of mass is ahead of my feet, it's easier to drop into those shin angles. Pretty much all I have to do from here is fall using my center of mass, which is already ahead of my feet. Think of it as always being on the edge of exploding out. So I'm dribbling here, I'm leaning, I'm almost ready to go. So when I want to, I can just fall out of it and get into it off of that. And then a third benefit of this is ball protection. When I'm hinged over, the ball is again behind my center of mass. That defender is gonna have to reach all the way through and under my chest essentially to reach that ball. Most times this is too far of a distance for them to reach, whereas if I'm in this upright position here, it's right by my hip, it's right in front of them, and they can just reach and swipe it. So you'll see a lot of players like Harden, D-Wade, they'll protect the ball by leaning forward. One, this puts them in a great position to explode from, and two, that ball is now essentially behind them, and that defender is gonna have to make a big swipe if he wants to get it. Now, this is not to say that this is the way to do things. A lot of athletes are just built differently. They're not as posterior chain dominant, so they will play in a more upright position as they're looking to get past. Or it's just the way that they grew up playing, and they can make this upright posture work for them as well. So it's not one way to do things, but this is a technique that you can play around with. You can try it out. It may give you benefits, may not, but for a lot of the top hoopers in the world, this does work because of the positions that it puts us in. Plus, notice that at slower speeds, players generally are more upright. They can see the court, and they don't need that powerful hip extension that we get from hinging at the hip. So all of these factors come into play as we're thinking about those positions that we're gonna be in as we're getting ready to attack. Each individual athlete will have a certain range that works for them best. It's really just about finding yours, playing around with new positions, new postures, seeing what works best for you, and then applying it into your game and into your training.